and it is 6:03. I'd like to bring our meeting to order. Before we do that, I just want to let everybody know we are here in the depot. There's 3 of us. There is nobody in the public in attendance at this time. We are also on Zoom, and you can find that Zoom link right on the agenda. So with that said, let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
To the flag,
United States of America, and
to the republic, which is
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, let's have roll call, please.
Okay, Chairperson Jan Clark-Kretz,
Here.
Bonnie London,
Here.
no Tim, no AJ, Jean Wilson,
Here.
Beth Cohen,
Here.
Randy Elder,
here.
and Ramona is not here. Auxiliary member Greg Obranovich.
Yes,
Okay.
here.
All right, great, thank you. Now it's time for committee comment for items not on the agenda. Anybody want to have anything they'd like to discuss that's not on our agenda tonight? And any public members have anything they'd like to discuss? All right, hearing and seeing none, is there a motion perchance to approve tonight's agenda?
I make a motion.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you. That was Bonnie. And now roll call, please.
Yes, Chairperson Jan Clark-Kretz,
Yes.
Bonnie London,
Yes.
Jean Wilson,
Yes.
Beth Cohen,
Yes.
and Randy Elder.
Here.
Okay, now we're going to move on to the consent agenda. Is there any comment on our consent agenda, either with the committee or any members of the public?
This is Bonnie. There's just a minor correction on the minutes from the last meeting. It has me as absent, but I came in late.
Okay, did you notice? Let me see if I put it down there. Oh, usually what I do is I put in what time you show up. I'll put that time, what time you showed up in there.
I think
Okay,
it is in there. I think it's in there, Carol.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Usually I
under
do
the
that, but if
roll.
it's missing, I'll make sure I add that to it.
And then it
It
also
is-
shows when Randy Elder left. So they had times for both of those things, I think, are in it.
Yeah, the minutes reflect in the roll call that Bonnie, you arrived at 7:50 and member Elder was out at 7:12.
Yes, okay, that's what I normally do, because you just weren't there for a vote, so that's why it was put like that.
Okay, thanks.
Uh-huh.
All right, is there a motion to accept the consent agenda?
I so move, Jean.
I second it.
Okay, we have a Jean motion and Randy has a second. Can we have roll call, please?
Yes, Jan Clark-Kretz,
Yes.
Bonnie London,
Yes.
Jean Wilson,
Yes.
Beth Cohen,
Yes.
and Randy Elder.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. So we are going to go now over to committee discussion, committee matters. Mary Beth.
Certainly. Thank you all for being here this evening. We're going to pick up where we left off at our last meeting, and that was on the review of the general plan designations, beginning at light industrial or limited industrial, the ILT designation. And I welcome Mark to lead this lively discussion.
Oh, well, you know, the only thing you have to look forward to after this is the glossary. So, gosh, that'll be riveting. Okay, so as Mary Beth pointed out.
Could you increase the size just a little bit, Mark? Sorry.
Is that?
Wrong
Whoa.
way.
You can pinch it on your screen. And
There
move it
you
in.
go.
Okay.
That's great.
Thank you, Mark.
Absolutely. Okay, so as Mary Beth pointed out, this is where we left off during our discussion, and we have two industrial designations in town. We have the limited ILT and the light IL. We don't really have a heavy industrial designation, which is fine because I don't think we want smokestacks and various other sundry pieces. As before, the reason this text is out is that we'll put it on the map. It's a color on the map. Take a look at the purpose because this is important. And then it's basically what we would typically have called back in the day heavy commercial. It's a place where you might have an office out front and then have a need for some warehousing. I'll use a small W for that. It's the store product that you either need to sell or distribute from your little office, not from Amazon or Target or anything like that. So they're often this need for this hybrid where it's a professional office and then there's some larger shop space next to it. They can, but don't always make good neighbors, but they can make good neighbors for the residential. I know that town has some issues, particularly at the north end, where we have some of this designation next to an existing subdivision. Honestly, I think the primary issue there is the fact that there's just a little wooden fence between them. I don't know that that's enough for what's going on the other side of the fence. But here's our designation. And the committee last time also wanted to see the densities and intensities. Those are down below. I don't believe there's any recommended changes from what you see in the text here.
I guess my only comment right now, it says limited industrial, and then you read through and it talks about provide locations for light industrial. And then you got another section below that says light industrial. Is that confusing or does that make sense? You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Remember, this is out of your current general plan. So I'm happy to change it. From my perspective, I question the need to have two industrial designations. But if we're going to have them, then they should probably be distinct. And I think limited and light are so close together that somebody might consider them the same.
Right.
I think we do need to have distinct ones because we have that area and it has been and continues periodically to be a problem. And we have people that say, well, it's industrial, the residential should just get used to it. It's their fault for buying next to it instead of realizing that, no, we do have, more stringent requirements right next to the residential. I think if we put them together, we're just asking for even more problems. Now, the things that are the bullets, that kind of thing would go into zoning ordinance.
That's correct.
Okay.
However,
what about
well, go ahead, Andy. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, instead of saying light industrial uses in that first paragraph, call it limited industrial uses because it describes that they are limited. And then I think I know where you're going as you were starting to talk. So I'll let you go from there.
All right. What I was going to say, Gene, is yes, I like to have this sort of stuff in zoning. However, if this is how the town is differentiating between limited and light industrial, then perhaps we should form this into a sentence to explain why it's limited.
I agree.
Or maybe what the difference is.
Well, that's what I was thinking. These bullet points. We could say something like the expectation uses within this designation.
And do we have areas in town that would be designated for both limited and light industrial at the same time? Or would you designate an area for one or the other?
One or the other, Greg.
Okay.
So
that can get tricky too.
It's just that strip along Swetzer that backs up. That's that only place that is the ILT.
That's just that strip that's on Swetzer, between like Kathy Way and Swetzer, that side of the street. The other side of the street is the light industrial, where we have our more heavy duty industry.
It's right up here, Greg. Can you see that? I'm sorry if it's.
Can you point to it?
I shall. It's a beautiful lavender right here.
Okay,
And this is
that
that
IL.
ILT. And the
Okay.
IL is industrial.
All right.
And to my knowledge, that's the only industrial in town.
That's correct.
Right. Okay.
Sorry, it keeps jumping around. I have no idea why it's doing that. All right, so we all know where it is. I'll get out of this and get back to them. So what I did here was I made a couple of these points into a sentence, and we can wordsmith this, but the expectation of uses within this designation is that they would know,
Have no.
not outdoor activity or storage areas. And loading areas would adjacent residential uses.
Why don't we just want to leave the bullet points as they were instead of trying to condense it into a single sentence?
Well, first of all, this is all going into a table. And secondly, when I read it originally, the bullets are going into the zoning code. And I'm trying to tease apart the land use designations, which are a broad overarching thing, from regulatory pieces that talk about screened storage areas and normal weekday business hours. Those don't belong in your general plan.
It seems important, though, to me to have some bigger distinctions in there, especially about noise and, because that's one of the biggest problems that we have.
And it's not in this
That's
one.
the biggest and the recurring problem.
Yes. No
The sentence
noise.
that says industrial uses that can operate near residential uses without adversely affecting residents does cover that. So that would be noise, vibration, smells, et cetera. So from the standpoint of the zoning code, that gives you enough information in the general plan to then add that information in the zoning code.
I still think because we have so many issues there that we should keep it in there, in the general
Sure.
plan. What's some of the other committee members' thoughts? What do you think, Beth?
If it's not in the zoning code already, then I say we leave it in here until which point we can actually get an appropriate zoning code language adopted. And then in the next round, then we can remove it. But right now, it seems like you just leave yourself with a big gap.
Well, I think there was a concern, if it is already in the zoning code, there's a concern about having the same thing in two different places. Because then you update one spot and then you don't update the other. So if it's in the zoning code and it's pretty clearly in there, and maybe there should be a reference, say, please refer to zoning code such and such for specific details, so that people don't overlook the fact that there is more information.
I'm trying to remember if this kind of thing is specific there, or is it all whatever is in the chart form? I don't remember. I'm trying to find it.
And then question for staff is, you are very well aware of the issues that we've been having. What can we put in this general plan to help you solve those problems?
This works This text works really well, and then the zoning code and noise ordinance and those other documents really pin things down.
And I want to
So-
go ahead and just read from the zoning code, just when we talk about definitions. When
Thank
it
you.
talks about the ILT, it says that the ILT zoning district is applied to areas abutting residential zoning districts where only a limited range of industrial manufacturing activities and offices used will be appropriate. Land uses allowed in the ILT zoning district will not create objectionable noise, smoke, odor, dust, gas, glare, heat, vibration, etc. So the concerns that you guys have is spelled out very clearly in the definition. When you look at the light industrial definition in the zoning code.
And then additionally in the code, if you go down to section 13.28.060, it has hours of operation limited to between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 on Saturday, and not on Sundays unless there's a use permit.
And does it talk about noise? And it seems to me I remember it does.
It definitely does. I mean, even in the definition, like I was reading, they spell out noise, dust, gases, glare, vibration. All of that is spelled out really clear, even just in the definition. And then the zoning code talks about the noise and stuff like that in addition.
And
looks
also
like
the
it-
chart for allowable uses is restrictive more so than the light industrial zone.
And then it's even restricted further if the parcel is adjacent, like, right adjacent to the residential. The zoning code is even more restrictive on allow that they have to get a use permit or they have to have a minor use permit so that all of that can be spelled out really clearly before a business starts.
It may be that what we need to do is when the zoning code is looked at again, to look very carefully at what we have listed as allowable uses,
Right.
because that may be where the problem has come in. Maybe we need to just be real careful and think through the implications of that. For instance, maybe we don't want rifle ranges there now that we know that the batting practice places caused a problem just with batting.
For sure.
Andreas posted some text in the chat box, which would be to add to this definition. And it says to avoid adverse impacts on nearby residential uses, limited industrial is distinguished from light industrial in that uses within the limited industrial shall only operate during normal weekday business hours.
I think since we were struggling for the distinction between IL and ILT, we could point towards this noise impact issue with that little description. And I don't think that runs counter to the more detailed restrictions that we have in the zoning, while it does memorialize here in the general plan that we do have some concerns about the impacts on residential uses nearby.
So are you saying that there is something we could or should put here?
Suggesting that if we really want to mention the noise issue here, we could put something like that in the limited industrial description here as kind of a further distinction between that and the light industry.
You could put something after to avoid adverse impacts, comma, including noise, air quality. Yep.
And I don't know if we want to get very specific about the hours of operation here. We may or we may not. In another jurisdiction, I've recently run into an issue where the general plan is vague like this by saying normal weekday hours. And then there's, in another location, some hours that are specifically laid out where that was interpreted as inconsistent. So I don't know if we want to not get as specific as hours here as well. Especially since the definition of hours of operation that Christy was reading actually includes hours on Saturday as well. So I think
A question. I'm not that familiar with the businesses in that area right now. Are there any that are open during the weekend? Because my guess is some businesses will want to do Saturday work.
Is the batting practice place open on Saturdays?
That I don't know.
Yes, limited hours. Eva, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
I'm here. Yes, there are operations on Saturdays. I would also like to request holidays be included in that, in those hours. Saturday, Sundays and holidays as being non-operational.
And Saturdays.
On the bullet points, one of my concerns is the outdoor activity, because there's a few of these businesses that have storage yards. And so there's some heavy duty equipment that goes in. There's movement of a lot of heavy duty equipment. So I'll hear clanging of metal. And, you know, when they're moving things around, it gets pretty loud in my backyard. And it's like, if one business does it, then the other business starts doing it. And then it's just, you know, it's just increased. They're doing mechanics back there sometimes. But
So in other words, we don't have code enforcement that we ought to enforce what we say we're doing.
correct. I definitely agree with that. Because it boils down to that noise issue.
There's, I mean, to be frank here, there's nothing I'm going to put in here that will fix that.
There's not supposed to be storage yards. Start with.
Right, so this is already in your code. It's already in your general plan. and
I'd like to see you keep
We
it.
already have the issue, so we need to figure out what we're going to say here, and then note that that's a code enforcement thing that we need to deal with.
I think note that some of this stuff is in the zoning code and it belongs in the zoning. So reading your language that you have in there, the existing language plus the addition, I believe that's plenty of good language where we can go into the zoning code and update it.
In the part that says including the new line, could we put such as, because if we say including A, B, C, and D, and somebody comes up with something else, then, well, it didn't spell it out that was an adverse effect. So, but if we put such as.
That, I actually think it was Ava had a point there. If we're going to differentiate between the uses, I think not having outdoor activity or storage is a pretty significant divider between the two. And that maybe should go up here as well. But I'm also okay if that just stays in the zoning code. I'm just trying to look for a different way for having limited versus light industrial use.
Right now, the way that you wrote this is that to avoid all these adverse impacts, the limited industrial just limits operating hours, but that's not accurate. It limits the operating hours and the allowable uses, right? And then all those hours and uses are what you're saying is found in our zoning code. And we just read from that. And I think all these bullet points are in the zoning code.
Correct. Good point.
That works. Good
I'm not an English teacher, but I think we don't need the comma before the and at the end of that sentence you just worked on.
Right.
And I think we can lose the bullets again. And then another thing I just noticed is that it's light industry rather than industrial. Maybe we want to talk about changing that to light industrial to be parallel to limited industrial. Otherwise, we'll need to change it in that sentence to say light industry rather than industrial.
I was going to suggest that we make it light industrial, but either way probably works. Just so they would be parallel.
And on the third bullet, I think going forward to the zoning code, if we can put a note here to add holidays.
In the zoning code, yeah.
In the zoning code, yeah.
We don't have to put it in here or either place, but I think we do allow their offices to be open. If they can go in and work there, but they're not to have clients and regular whatever they're doing. But that gets taken care of in the conditional uses.
Correct.
Eva has her hand up.
Oh, go ahead, Eva.
Okay, something else I wanted to throw out there because it is part of this, because I am a part of this zone, I butt up against it. And I'm not sure exactly where this is covered or will be covered. And that is the definition of nuisance. When something becomes repetitive over and over again, that, where is it defined? Where is it addressed? So it's pretty much a generic, but I want to make sure it's in here somewhere.
Christy, do we have nuisance in the glossary?
Yes, we do. We'll get to that tonight, hopefully.
That's a good point. Maybe we need to someplace note that it's repetitive noise that's particularly the issue that keeps coming up.
Christy, can you make a little note down there where we haven't gotten yet, but so that we can have something to remember that with? I'm sure we won't forget, but.
I've got it in the glossary.
Okay.
We'll get there hopefully tonight, and I'll read it and everyone can come to some conclusions on the language that's used.
So this sentence here struck me as incongruous to the rest of the definition of ILT. That's not your expectation.
No, I think everything up above covers what we want to do in that land use designation.
Yeah, so I had this flagged as a huh. Would it be okay if I deleted the sentence? Because I don't think that's what you intend for the ILT at all.
What has happened is that we actually have largely done that over time. So we're looking at something that we were trying to do 20 years ago. We said, hey, we need to switch these things over. And I think largely that has happened because we had more irritating businesses probably that were in there then, but things have more switched over. I don't know if we still need to keep that goal, because I think it's partly been met anyway, or largely met. What do the rest of you think?
Well, hang on. If we're going to keep it, then this needs to stay light industrial or limited industrial. The way I would read this is you could put any industrial use in there.
I don't even know if I'm trying to say that I think that evolution has been happening. I don't know if we still need to keep that at all.
I would agree with that.
What do the rest of you think on that?
I'm not even sure what it means. It says that you want it to be more compatible with residential uses, which is what we were trying to indicate in that paragraph above by saying we don't want to, impact the noise and odor and air quality and whatever else was listed in there. So it seems like it might just be redundant, but
especially, Beth, that when we inherited this industrial zone, there were much more heavy resident industrial uses. And when we came in and we established this, our hope was to, as those businesses left, to have the whole area, evolve to this limited use from what it used to be. And I agree with Jean, it probably has already mostly evolved from what was to what is.
Randy, do you have an opinion?
The difference between the ILT and the light industry, as it's called right now, is primarily location around residential use. And that's happened. That I think we identified there's only one place in town where we have the ILT. Is that not correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. So that build out has already happened. And the issues, Eva, are you still there? If you are, why don't you voice your opinion on this? But the issue between the friction with the residential area and the ILT, I think has been resolved over time. I may be wrong on it. Eva lives in that area, or did, so she may be able to comment. Those are my thoughts.
Okay, there's two issues that we run into, and part of it has to do with allowable uses, which I understand is not in the general plan, but in the zoning code. So that definitely needs to be addressed when we get there. Oh gosh, what was the other comment? The statement that is in here that you're talking about taking away, I mean, when I first read that can almost be interpreted two different ways. It doesn't say, well, more compatible with adjacent residential areas. So yeah. But it has to do with enforcement, and it has to do with allowable uses at this point in the game.
Okay.
To Randy's comment, Jean, I think it's true that it's largely built out, but many of those are leased facilities. So we still have the issues of what business is going to go in there. So it's not like it's going to stay. That's why we have to keep on the cases with our use permits of what they get to do and make sure that they are compatible.
Well, isn't that become a code enforcement issue? Isn't that an enforcement issue rather than being in the general plan?
Yes.
I think, to me, we're done with this issue. I suggest we maybe change the light industry to industrial, if nothing else. Keep the limited industrial and be done with it.
Anybody
Given
else
the
on the
comments that we've had sometimes at hearings, I think it's important to keep it limited because we get comments that, well, it's all industrial. The people in the residential know they basically blame the people that move there instead of saying, no, this is not the regular light industrial. This is a very special limited zoning, and no, it's not the same.
I agree.
And if we take that away, I think it's going to give us more problems.
I think what he meant, Gene, was he was in agreement with changing the light industry to light industrial. He wasn't saying he wanted to change it. So I think what he was trying to say.
I thought he meant eliminate it.
No,
Okay.
He was
misunderstood.
Eva?
I mean, I understand that right now, where we are in office between Swetzer and Kathy is that limited area, but I have future concerns as we continue to grow and there's talk about developing along Sierra College and, the homes that are over that way. You're talking about, possibly mixed uses with combination of residential and businesses off Sierra College. And this limited industrial is going to be that buffer zone for the people that live there. So I'm just pointing that out for the future growth.
Thank you, Eva. Anybody else on the committee have anything, comments? Bonnie?
Sorry. No, I think everyone's actually done a really good job addressing it. I agree with all the comments above.
Okay, so if that's the case, nobody is in disagreement. It looks like we are good with the limited industrial at this point.
Does that include taking out that last sentence that I brought up, or do you want to leave that in? This one here.
And so Andreas mentioned that normal weekday business hours, that just leaves a lot to sort of trying to figure out what normal is. And all of this
I already
is in the,
changed that. I'm talking about this one here.
He changed it to limited operating hours, which would, then we can cover in the conditional use permit.
Yes, and I'm fine with that change. I think that works. The way that Mark changed it.
I was referring to this last sentence here that we were discussing. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear.
I think there was consensus on removing it.
yes.
Cool beans. All right. So over 50, I save regularly. All right, light industry. Oh. Pretty much covers the whole gamut. Question for the committee: do you want or need to limit warehouse sizes in this designation?
You know, Mark, go ahead, G. Go ahead.
I don't know how, we have, some of these are small pieces, small parcels, small buildings, but then there are some on the railroad side that have fairly, they're not going to be warehouse size for Amazon, but we've got some fairly big pieces over there. The Dupnik area, for instance, is a good sized piece of property. So I don't know, I don't have a good idea of what we might be wanting to limit or not.
Like what I was going to say is I don't think you have large enough parcels, Mark, even if you combine them all to get the kind of large warehouse, like an Amazon warehouse in here. I just think the topography, the roads, and the lot lines really don't allow for that. So I don't know if you need to put it in there.
I think the size of a warehouse is going to be self-limiting just because of the area and the property sizes. I don't, if you did have a large warehouse, you still have to mitigate for negative impacts such as noise, odor, etc. So if you have a large warehouse, so what?
Fair enough.
Why is that any less desirable than anything else?
I'm working with a number of agencies who are specifically precluding fulfillment centers in their general plan, then linking it to their zoning. So just bring it up because I've been discussing it for about 6 months now. So I think you're right, Amy.
What are their issues with fulfillment centers? Is it traffic?
A large part of it's traffic. Part of it too is it consumes a good portion of the industrial land that they have and doesn't return much in the way of benefit to the community. There is also in many of the towns I work in an environmental justice issue. The primary truck routes don't go by the wealthy people's homes, they go by the poor people's homes. And when you exacerbate that issue with additional trucks, it becomes a problem. So that's why a number of them have decided either to prohibit them outright. There are a number of communities that have simply banned them or have required a development agreement that would demonstrate what the civic benefit was for the town. But in this instance, I agree with Andy. I don't think you have a big enough area to worry about here anyway. And when we get to business, we can talk about that as well.
Something a lot of people may not be aware of, the land along the railroad, a lot of that is still owned by the railroad, and those people are on very short leases. So they're not going to want to invest a lot of money into build. We had a case where this came up for a use permit, and we wanted a bunch of improvements, and the guy said, the railroad can kick me out in 60 days. I can't afford to put that in. So I don't know how much of that is railroad owned, but those people are on kind of a short leash, and you'd have to want to get enough land together to put something big in there.
Yeah, nobody that I know would even contemplate that if they couldn't own the land. So anyway, I just brought it up, just trying to be.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Good to know.
I
I just
am
can't
curious.
imagine.
Oh, sorry,
can't
go ahead,
imagine a
Greg.
lot. Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead, Beth. Beth,
I
go
was
ahead.
gonna say, I don't understand what startup businesses means in here. And then I don't know why we would want to encourage manufacturing plants in a light industrial zone. So those two I find odd.
Well, haven't we had manufacturing back there?
Oh, yeah. Yes, we do. We've got a company on Swetzer that does, are we talking about Swetzer?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. And we've got a company that remanufactures aircraft exhaust systems. We've got a company right on the corner of King and Swetzer that does heavy industrial for vulcanization systems, right, such as fireplaces and such. So it happens. I think personally that if we change the name light industry to industrial and insert in there a sentence that says not to be located adjacent to residential uses and leave everything else the same, I think that in my mind, that takes care of the issue from differentiating from the ILT.
Won't people read that as that includes heavy industry, which we really don't want heavy industry, I don't think.
Those allowable uses are then further defined in the zoning code.
I kind of agree with Beth that startup businesses is a head scratcher to me. I wouldn't know how to define one. And if I was doing anything, I'd probably take out the plants on manufacturing, just because I don't want a car dealer, but going by the same discussion we just had on the size of those parcels, I mean, have you had any issues here? Is it something that we need to change or just leave it alone?
Yeah, have we had any issues?
Manufacturing is going to include plants, I would think. And I agree on startup. I don't see that is a helpful phrase.
Eva, go ahead.
Just an FYI that one business that is on the corner of King and Swetzer that does manufacturing machine shop stuff, apparently they work 24/7, and there are times we can hear their machinery. I can hear their machinery in my yard late at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, but it's far enough that it's not, too intrusive, but it is enough where I can hear it. Just FYI.
Is this the one that's actually zone commercial?
Can you show the map again, please?
Yes. There you go.
It's that one right on the corner there with the.
Is that GC? Yeah, that's the one that's GC. That's the one we can hear.
And I think
So
he's.
It's not even industrial.
Change. Didn't that parcel get asked to be changed?
Yes, they would like to be industrial, either ILT or IL. So either of them, but they are requesting a change because they want to, the owner wants to move their existing operation to a larger facility, which they could do on that property.
So
If
more
it
noise.
If it became ILT, then we would be able to control the noise issue better than where they are now, I guess. Because would they have to come in for an ILT conditional use permit then?
I'm not sure what the business does, so I'm not, they would need to change that GC designation to an industrial one. But I'm not quite sure what they do to compare it to the code and the requirements in there.
But also just to remember, Gene, that any new building requires a use permit, even if it's a permitted use. If they're building a new building to start a business, they are going to require a full use permit. So
right.
we're going to get all the protections and everything that we need right at the very beginning if somebody was wanting to start something up there.
Thank you. I forgot that.
And they're looking at the vacant lot. There's nothing on that particular portion of the parcels right now. I know that there's one next door to the west, but they're looking at the one directly at the intersection of King and Swetzer.
So Christy, are you saying that that entire GC section is vacant? Or
no, there's if you go towards the west along King, oh, here we go. if Mark can locate it, you'll see there's one existing structure, and it looks like it has a couple of different businesses in it, and then the lot next to it is vacant.
Here's King.
Yeah, so if you,
that's where Woody's and stuff like
there,
that is. Woody's Deli,
vacant.
that kind of stuff is on the far side, and
I
then
see.
the one in front of it is the vacant one.
Right.
Vacant there.
Yep.
Is that my deli there?
And then the next one is where Woody's Deli, La Fogata, the Chinese food place.
So it would be that GC area would be basically, it's not asked for the whole thing. It's just the whole one side of it. The east
Is that
side.
right? Asking for one side, not the Woody's side?
It's that empty lot.
Right here.
So on this map, it's more of the C. Yeah, number 3.
This
Good
parcel.
job, Howard.
Okay, but we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about the definition for light industrial.
And we have had some bigger kind of manufacturing there for years. The Dupnik place made portable school buildings for years and years. So we have had some of that kind of manufacturing going on with no problem that I can remember.
Okay.
Yeah,
there's
when I think of manufacturing plants, I'm thinking of like HP's facility in Roseville, where they're building computer chips with all the chemical and water use and stuff. So I don't know. It just sounds like manufacturing plants is very broad and is not light industrial. But if everyone thinks that's fine, then.
But because if you look at our definitions, Beth, when we get to that point, you're going to see all the definitions of manufacturing that we have. We have we have light manufacturing, medium, and heavy. And the zoning, if you look at the zoning table, it will tell you which particular manufacturing is allowed in certain locations.
Then can we just call it light manufacturing facilities instead of manufacturing plants?
Well, not all of it is it's not all of them are not light, because the definitions of food place is one definition, but a manufacturer of clothing and leather is another item, and another one is the definitions spell it out pretty good. We just have to make sure that everybody knows that they have to, for each individual site in our zoning tables, it tells you exactly what you can or cannot do. And there's a lot of them that are just strictly forbidden. You'll see there's no use, there's no definition for them.
Is the question, do we want to take the word plants out? Is that what is a little scary? If we just said manufacturing, and we do, like, I would assume the brewery back there is manufacturing beer.
Yeah.
That is manufacturing.
And Ticket Chocolate manufactures chocolate.
Yep.
So is it the word plants that's bothersome?
Yeah.
Does that help? I've got some tense issues that I need to figure out here. So this would be warehousing, manufacturing, and right. There was a comment made by somebody about specifically stating the designation that this designation is intended for manufacturing, blah, 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 and not near residential or not adjacent to residential. Do we want to include that phrase in here?
Yeah, that was Randy's suggestion.
And I would repeat it, that will take care of the issue. We don't care if there's a manufacturing plant, at least I don't, it's not adjacent to residential. It's going to be, I mean, let's be honest about this. We're talking about the town of Loomis. Nobody's going to put a manufacturing plant of an HP size, if you will, anywhere in Loomis. Under the current general plan and zoning, there's no place it would work. And then, as Greg Obranovich said, we already have zoning caveats and restrictions that would further prevent that from happening. We're not going to have these type of facilities in Loomis. I think if we just address the issue head on, that we're talking about being disruptive to residential, to people where they live and sleep, that's the issue. And that's all I have to say.
I don't think that any of the light industrial is adjacent to residential, correct? The
No.
Adjacent was the one above, the ILT or whatever terminology you're using.
That is correct. However, we also want to leave some breadcrumbs in there for future land use changes to make sure that the later town council doesn't get excited and forget about it. So this would mean that if somebody was to come up and ask to change to an industrial use next to residential, the only way to make that happen would be with a general plan amendment.
Yeah.
It also looks like up by Angelo Court, we have some IL right next to residential land use designation.
Yes.
Right here. Okay.
So what would that send? Did you put that in already, Mark? Or
Yeah, right here is where I put it.
So that would be a conflict if it is up there next to Angelo.
Yeah, it's not going to be an issue for existing.
Okay,
This would only really come into play for new.
does anybody disagree with adding that sentence? Okay. And then I think Eva had a comment, something about allowable uses, comes down to allowable uses. So again, dialing this down into our zoning code. And I really like how that protects the future.
Public quasi-public, if we're done there, Chair, can I move on?
Please.
Public quasi-public land use designation. This is what it says. I don't have any fault with it. I can tell you as a planner, I dislike it intensely, but it's there. There's no reason to not have it.
And then Mark, before you go on, I think Miguel had a question. He was thinking that we might have eliminated something above. And Miguel, actually, no, it's not eliminated. It is like that in the zoning code, correct? Mary Beth?
I need more context if I can answer the question.
Mary Beth?
Yeah, I'm not.
So he, yeah,
It just took it out of the general plan and you'll find that in zoning.
okay, he said thanks. Thank you for putting into context for me, Mary Beth. Mm-hmm.
Outstanding. Okay. Public, quasi-public, any magic there?
What is it that you don't like and what would you suggest if you have some quickie suggestions?
I don't like limiting. I mean, the way this reads, if the town wanted to buy a piece of land, you'd have to get a general plan amendment. Or if a school district wanted to sell a piece of land, they'd have to get a general plan amendment. I mean, it gets to a certain point where just keeping track of these public uses can be annoying. And we typically allow schools in any zone district that they can go into. We have no control over that. Fire stations and parks and whatnot, property comes up when it comes up. And I wouldn't want the town's hands handcuffed if we needed to buy a piece of land, but we hadn't designated it public, quasi-public. It just adds an unnecessary level of complexity to running an agency. That's all.
So the issue is if it isn't designated P now, it's a problem because you have to do a general plan amendment.
Exactly. If you're going to add it as a public use and you have this designation, you either add it as a P or you then have this hybrid system where some stuff is shown as a public use and some stuff is just stuck in the zoning. That's all. Again, this is not a hill to die on or a curb to trip over. It's just a point. If you're happy with the way it is, there's no reason to change it. If, on the other hand, the town's run into issues with this, then now would be the time to make that change.
Pretty much what I've seen the town of Loomis do is once they have property and they own it, then they choose to designate it public. But the town of Loomis owns land currently that is not designated public, quasi-public. It's designated other uses, so that hasn't been a limitation to the town at this moment.
Fair enough. We good?
Anybody have anything they want to add or ask? Anybody in the public? Okay, let's move on then.
So, right. Open space and conservation. This is a new ad. This comes out of some of the conversations we've had in the other committees. And I think we've wordsmithed this a couple of times, but certainly it's here to be wordsmithing.
Do we have this somewhere on our land use map? The OSC?
I don't believe so because it's brand new.
So we're looking to
yeah,
add
look at the
this to
general
map.
Okay. Yeah, the map has that land over in the Hidden Falls area is public.
We're not talking about public, we're talking about open space.
I understand. I was just looking.
Okay.
So you are correct. The general plan today does not have an open space and conservation designation. This is new.
This is going, then everything that's a conservation area is going to get a different designation. Rather than be included in, say, included in a public park, or what about the ones at Monserrat that are conservation easements?
Bonnie, what is Monserrat currently designated?
I think that it's private conservation areas or easements.
So that's
There's
not,
a,
They're part of people's lands, their lots. So it would be difficult to separate that out in, I would think, and make somebody's lot have a little area around the building envelope for each of those lots.
Yes,
No,
but you wouldn't be required to change every conservation space to that designation. I think this would be used for something a little different than for Montserrat.
yes.
In Montserrat, it would basically be whatever residential designation applies there, you would have a conservation area within that.
Miguel?
So how does this work with what would be passive park space, open space?
The
Would-
open space and conservation, yes. Could be both, actually, Gene.
It would be both, but what do you put on the map?
You just put OSC on the map.
Where is our passive parks and open space? That's all on private land, right? Like on the residential agriculture. Is that what we're talking about?
you know, I see Secret Ravine as an opportunity when if something comes forward along Secret Ravine to be designated OFC rather than tourist destination.
well, how about areas such as the 10 acres on the old village lot? That was kind of a wetlands area that was more or less, would that be a conservation area?
That definitely, you know, once it goes through the process and if it's designated as conservation, then that would go from its current designation of public, P, quasi-public, to OSC, I believe. So there's an opportunity there also.
Mm-hmm.
So you're really looking at areas that you have agreements, the town has agreements, that this is going to be in permanent conservation, and it just helps keep it that way.
Yeah. Well, I know Sierra de Montserrat, they have a public walkway along the roadside designated. And I don't know if it would fit into that category or not. A lot of people, I think, have forgotten about that, but there is supposed to be a walkway along the roadside between the properties and the road, a slight easement there. And I think it's not very well maintained, and it really probably doesn't even look like much of a walkway at this point, but it is there. Is that right, Jean?
Greg, are you talking about the horse trail?
In Sierra de Montserrat.
Right, there's a horse trail that runs on one side up and down
Yeah.
Rutherford Canyon. Okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that trail.
Miguel?
The town took on some area in back of Brace Ranch Estates off of on Brace, those houses there. And I think there was some almost regret because then the town had to be responsible for going and cleaning all that area out. But the town, you know, that kind of space, I suppose, would end up with that sort of designation.
And wasn't there also a little area right on the corner of Taylor Road and Sierra College where Homewood is, that Homewood gave over to the town that would fit into that category designation?
I don't know if they gave it over, if they just had to put if they just had to take care of it. I don't know if they made the town be responsible for that.
Mary Beth, I believe the town owns that land, does it not?
Yeah, it is. It was dedicated to the town.
Okay.
So that might be another area.
Correct.
It's not very big, but
Mark, we have a gentleman in our Zoom audience that would like to see a map of the horse trail, and that would be the one at Sierra de Montserrat.
I don't have a map of the horse trail at Sierra de Montserrat.
Yeah.
If you Google Earth it, it's pretty easy to see.
And then Miguel, I keep trying to get you into this, but you want to go ahead and give it a shot? You would just need to unmute, Miguel.
Help me out here. We're
So you're gonna go south.
way south here, right? Messes me up because I don't have the city limits on my Google Earth.
If you go up towards the top of your screen, you'll see a road that kind of right there where your cursor just was, right there. Mhm.
The windy road there.
This one?
You see the little roundabouts, would be Rutherford.
Okay, so the trail is supposed to be on Rutherford?
Yeah,
On the lower side of the street.
there you go. Yeah, there it is. Is that it
That's the other, it's on the other side of the street.
That?
on the right?
No, it's on the right.
There it is.
That's a
See.
trail?
Yeah,
Or is it-
that was my point earlier.
So if you kind of go down, this is actually a really bad part of that trail, but you see, and if you kind of go in that general direction, and then maybe you can see that on the left side there, see those big crevasses and all of that. It's about a 4 foot, 5 foot trail right there, wide.
It's decomposed granite, so it can wash out if it's not kept up.
Who's responsible to maintain that? The HOA?
Yes, I believe that's true. That's right.
Yeah, ordinarily, if you have a trail, it's for horses, it's wider than that and it's signed.
Yeah, I was going to say
Just have to know it.
signage would be appropriate.
I don't know that I'd want to walk anything I valued along there.
Yeah.
I think for purposes of the land use designations, we wouldn't consider that open space or conservation area.
Agreed.
I agree.
By the way, considering the idea of the horses, I was surprised. Greg, the Ace Hardware owner, was saying the other day he was surprised that he didn't realize he was going to need to stock horse fencing and horse troughs, watering troughs, as part of what he needs to have on hand.
In Loomis.
And he said Bay Area people are coming and buying the large lots and they want to put horses in.
That's funny.
Okay, so are we okay with this definition?
I think we have more public comment.
I have a raised hand. Miguel, go ahead, and you are unmuted. I'm sorry.
Okay, two things. First, that trail in Monserrat, while it is in bad condition, the homeowners are paying a tremendous amount of money to have it maintained. So if I lived there, I would go back to the city, since they've got like $400,000 in the fund, and have it brought up to code. Getting back to the OS designation, I think if you look right now, somewhere in the Loomis plans, it says that you can't build within 100 feet of a creek. And I think we need the OS so that to designate that area along a creek like where Turtle Island is as OS right now. So it would be open space, and any other creek that's significant would be designated OS, because we say you can't build within 100 feet, but if there's no designation for OS for open space, that would be open space in the future.
Thank you,
Some
Miguel.
of that, though, I think they can have, I could be wrong. I thought that sometimes they can have less with the proper study by the biologists that say, yes, you can have less setback. I'm not sure if that would apply to creeks or only smaller kind of wet areas.
I also have one clarification. The trail for in Montserrat there is the HOA's responsibility, not the town's.
Yeah. Right.
So that means that homeowners should bring that up with their HOA, not with the town.
And then back to the creek conversation, having the word wetlands in there, does that seem that it would cover that? Or should we be more specific? Or Seems to me wetlands or waterways, maybe.
Actually, Mark, I think in conservation element, we've gone from wetlands to calling them riparian areas. Is that correct? I think to be consistent. And that also includes a little bit of the upland and that 100 feet that Gene was talking about, though it is based on actual vegetation, not just a distance.
Anybody on the committee have anything they'd like to say? Anybody disagree having this as an added land use designation?
Well, I guess my only concern is what it says it may be applied to these areas, but an awful lot of people have these kinds of things on their property and would not be happy to have the town come through and say, okay, you've got a different designation there. The slope of your place or the what we used to call wetlands, or even, you know, tree preservation. You know, if I've got a lot of tree preservation sites in the sense of it would take an expensive permit to take them down if I had a good reason to do it. So I'm a little confused about how does something like this become this OSC designation on private property?
Takes a general plan amendment, the vote of the town council and the commission to do that. The point of having the definition in here would be to allow you to consider development, say on Turtle Island, or say in some other part of the community where you want to protect something, and they could actually designate it as open space or conservation. I don't envision the town ever retroactively going back and doing anything on private property. Although, and I want to be absolutely clear, you have that ability. That is something the town has. It's one of the police powers you have. But you know, this town isn't going to go do that. This is simply to give you flexibility and options later on.
So basically, would it be appropriate then to say that this is something that we are trying to move towards, kind of like what I know we've talked about that in other land use designations, but is this would this be appropriate to say that in order to encourage
you can
open
certainly
space?
go there. There's really no need to do any of that. It's just another tool in your toolbox.
Now, so at this point in time, you have public, quasi-public on the area in the Hidden Grove area. The open space and conservation is just more descriptive. It's not public area because you're prohibiting the public from going in there other than maybe on trails. So the open space and conservation makes it very clear that's what this area is for. And the same when Turtle Island comes in, I'm sure we're going to want to talk to those landowners about preserving a secret ravine. And generally when you're doing something like that, just like in Hidden Grove, you're going to have demarcation, hopefully parcels that would be specific so that your land use designation goes on the parcel and is not splitting a parcel. So it really is those larger areas that the town is determined to be an open space or conservation for purposes of you know, retaining that habitat or that area. And I don't see that going on single family residential parcels or other agricultural parcels along corridors of streams, whatever. This is really where the town is saying, we want this as open space and conservation. And right now you have that designation in the Hidden Grove area. And this to me would be a better designation than public, quasi-public. Just it's more descriptive. That's about it.
Besides that, the public is not really going to be allowed on much of that Hidden Grove part anyway, because the Army Corps doesn't want people in there except
Correct.
along a limited area along the trail.
Correct.
Yeah, you'd have to be very careful about applying that to private property. And I know years ago when they had the Open Space Committee, they actually talked about designating certain areas as open space, and it was kind of restricting people's property. And I thought that was pretty radical. And I don't think that ever occurred, but it seems to me, Gene, that there were people that were talking along those lines. So, the threat or potential could be there, but we just have to be sure that it's never applied to private property like that.
Well, I think one other control is, I can't recall who brought it up, is who's responsible for maintaining it. And I can, at least with this town administration, the town is not going to maintain any of that land. So you're probably going to have a parcel created for it, and you're probably going to have a HOA or some other organization responsible for maintaining that. But this allows that to be designated and made very clear that it's not for development, it's for open space and it's for conservation.
Yeah. They probably set up a trust to maintain it.
That's possible, or a CFD or something like that. But there would be a mechanism to maintain it. The town is not in a position to maintain it.
Does somebody
Well, I
else-
think it's okay the way it is.
Matt Fox
After
has
all-
his hand
After all that.
up. Go ahead.
Can you hear
Matt.
me?
Yes.
Just real quick, I can't remember, is there a requirement from the town to have a certain amount of open space as there is with parks, or is that totally separate?
Currently, the town does require 5 acres of open space for every 1,000 person. The Parks and Recreation Committee just last week recommended that requirement be eliminated, and it only is 5 acres of park space per 1,000. So, but currently, the zoning code requires the park space and open space both.
Okay, I just wanted to double check on that, because there is quite a bit of property that would fall into the open space bucket, but it's not obviously not designated as open space. So there's land out. We've got more open space than I think we know about. I mean, there's the Legacy Lane development. I know has got a few acres of open, riparian area that would fall into that category, but it's zoned RS10. So it's in there. It's in the town. It's just not. It's just kind of buried in other districts. Thank you.
Before I don't have any comment on this particularly, except Parks and Open Space is not quite finished with what they're working on with these definitions and things. We're getting there, but we might want to just make a note that this definition is brought to that group to make sure that whatever we do in that one fits with that the two definitions are compatible.
On our land use map, where are our parks shown? Because you just said we need 30 acres of park.
We don't have adequate park space in the town right now. So you have the Blue Anchor Park over by the depot, and you have another park.
Sunrise.
It's Sunrise, and then the town has just acquired land adjacent, the library land with that vacant parcel, which I think is intended to be park. So that's it. There's not much.
Right. So Blue Acre Park is downtown. It's not showing up on here. This is Sunrise here. And
Right.
then right in here is where it's like a half acre, something like that. It wasn't very much.
I think it is about that. Yeah.
Right behind the library. Those are the locations.
I'm a little bit concerned that right now it says 5 acres of open space per 1,000 people, and we have 6,000 or 7,000 people here. And now we're adding a new land use, which leaves us open for like an eminent domain issue, like somebody was just saying, where the town gets a little bit heavy-handed and starts taking over properties that are along the riparian areas, which is mostly these residential agricultural properties.
Beth, I think, Anders, can you please circle back and talk about the 5 acres for the parks and 5 acres for the open space? because I know we agreed to the 5 acres for parks, but there was something in the zoning code that said both for 5
Yes.
acres and
It-
5 acres for.
Actually, it's in the subdivision ordinance, so that is where it's, and it is required 5 of parks and 5 of open space at the current time. And Parks and Recreation Committee discussed this at their last meeting and made the determination that the general plan should only have a requirement for 5 acres of parks per 1,000.
Hey,
And
Anders,
I-
this is Bonnie. Actually, I don't recall us making that recommendation. I think we were still in the process of discussing the issue.
We passed it, and therefore I thought that was consensus, and the minutes would reflect that. So if that isn't, then we'd have to go back and look at it. But we moved on from that discussion, and it was removed. The 5 acres of open space was removed in that discussion. So if
I thought
that's
that
not
we-
the case.
I thought that we did agree on the, I thought, I agree with Bonnie. I thought we agreed on part of that, but not necessarily all of it. And I think historically there's confusion because what is now deemed open space in that 5 acre requirement is more just open space. Whereas when that was put in as a requirement, it was basically passive park open space. In other words, plain old open space, it was passive park. And I think that is probably demonstrated by the fact that I was on Open Space 1, the first committee, and our job was, it was called the Open Space Committee. And our job was to look around the town and find parcels that would be appropriate for open space parks, not just open space that's not a park. And I'm not sure where along the line it got separated from being parkland, passive park open space, because that's when it went in as the 5 acres. That was what was intended. That was what we were supposed to be looking for, not just open space out there by itself, but usable passive park open space. And somehow those have gotten separated. I don't think there ever was before an understanding that we were looking for 5 acres of just plain open space.
Well, if there's confusion on what the Parks and Recreation Committee did, Mark, when we have our next Parks and Recreation Committee, we need to circle back and make sure that that's absolutely clear what the town wants. Because the question was, do you want 5 acres of open space parks and recreation per 1,000 or 10 acres? And that was kind of the discussion. Now, currently the town has 5 acres of open space and 5 acres of parkland, which is active parkland. So, yeah, we're going to have to circle back and have that discussion to see if the town wants 5 acres or 10 acres of basically dedicated land.
Right, and I think we hadn't discussed how to calculate that, because, it depends if we actually include Monserrat with their private conservation easements. There you have, I believe, 200 acres. And so in terms of open space, we actually might have met the requirement above and beyond, but that just depends on how we decide to calculate, correct?
Well, I think the discussion of calculations we had not come to yet. We had just discussed what was necessary under the general plan, not how you calculate it. I think that was still on the agenda to discuss. So it may be we have that discussion and then go back and say, do we have the right policy in the general plan?
It seems to me that what we did was we decided that we all agreed on the 5 acres for the parks. And I believe we also sent a recommendation to talk about that subdivision 10, the 5 acres for the open space. I believe that's what we did, is we said, this needs to be talked about. And it was the subdivision designation.
Right, because that was the first time that we'd heard of it, because prior to then, we were told that the 2010 open space master plan was just a draft and was not adopted. And that was the only time that we had discussed this possibility of 5 acres of active park and 5 acres of open space until the last meeting. That's when apparently, I think Christy had found the ordinance that said that we actually do require the 5 acres of park and 5 acres of open space.
And I think the discussion is appropriate at the Parks and Recreation. Right now, we're talking about the land use designation of open space conservation. So the question is, do you want to keep that in there and have that ability to designate land, or to take this out and just use your public, quasi-public when you want to designate it as non-development area?
I don't think there's a problem necessarily with leaving it, but I just think it needs to be some back and forth probably between this committee and the other one to make sure that we're all on the same page on what we're talking about.
Okay, and I think we have the note to take this definition back to the Parks and Recreation and confirm. Yeah.
Move on to specific plan, or we still here?
Anybody want to stay at the open space? Is there anybody in the public that would like to discuss this?
I see it. Hand up, hand down, and
Miguel?
back.
I think as long as, you know, we know that we might need to revisit it, then we should just go on.
Miguel, did he lower his hand? Okay. All right.
You're unmuted.
I think he lowered his hand.
Miguel, go ahead.
I don't know if it's in the Subdivision Map Act or where it is, but I know that that it states that you can't develop within 100 feet of a creek or stream. And that would be what this OS zone would be. It's, as far as I'm concerned, there's already this definition that limits building within that area on private property, on anything. And so this OS would be a zone that would be placed there because we already have this limitation as far as development.
I would
We have-
agree.
Yes. And then there's a comment from Richard. Have we looked into open space? I can't read that. In TD area.
TD area. So that would be the tourist destination land use designation. Have we looked into open space in the TD area?
That subcommittee looked at the area and has made, their recommendation is no land use designation changes at this moment in time. I think the opportunity would be when projects come in that we would specifically look at the stream area for this kind of a designation. But at this moment in time, the subcommittee has not made a recommendation to make any land use changes.
Okay, is any copy? Does that mean acknowledge?
Got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you, Richard.
Then let's move on if nobody else objects.
Okay, this is a designation for a specific plan. Originally, we didn't believe the town had one, but apparently we do. I still don't know what the status of that is.
Andreas and I could bring you up to date on that. That the status was the King Road, Horseshoe Bar Road, I-80 specific plan was never eliminated. However, the components of that specific plan have been superseded by general plan amendments, zoning code amendments, subdivision code amendments. And so it's our determination that that specific plan no longer has relevance. But when this general plan is adopted, we are going to be very clear that that specific plan is superseded by all the new adoptions and that it's no longer applicable.
Cool. So if there's an opportunity for the town to have another specific plan, you have a land use designation that explains that. Every town and agency does this a little differently. There's really no requirement to have a land use designation that says specific plan. It's just easier to do it that way. You can also just draw a line around it, have the land uses there. Lots of different ways of doing it. But the specific plan is a defined term through state law and has certain requirements to go with it. But in this context here, it is as you see written.
I'm trying to understand why we're adding it, that's all.
You don't have to add it. If you don't have it, you don't need it. If you don't have it, you don't need to have it to approve a specific plan. If you do have it, it's handy to have a definition so that somebody sees it on your map and knows where it is.
So at this point, anybody that asks for a specific plan has to go through a general plan update. I mean,
Amendment.
right? Yeah,
Right.
amendment.
But they would
So-
have to anyway, because a specific plan is also a general plan amendment.
I'm just wondering if it encourages people to come in to get specific plans and think that we're handing those out like a lot of other places when we really don't want to do that.
The specific plan has a very high requirement for everything from financing to infrastructure. I would think this is exactly what the town does want, particularly in the TD area, the BP area. I would think you'd rather have this than piecemeal. But that's just my opinion on them. Specific plans are very detailed and they're very useful for looking at different uses within an area.
How would the specific plan compare to, say, that we had a PD on the village? Would this give us more or about the same?
They're about the same, Gene. They're almost identical. Back when I started planning, we did PDs all the time. Then they fell out of favor. Now everybody does specific plans. Same difference. I'm skipping over a lot of parts, but essentially they can be the same difference.
Miguel, you're unmuted.
Thank you. Well, my understanding with a specific plan, you can change the requirements such as lot size, setbacks. That's why it's called a specific plan, because you come in with a different set of standards. And basically it changes the way the development is, quote, developed. And I'm really against that. I think we have a set of standards for setbacks, yards, lot coverage, and those types of things. We need to adhere to those standards, not allow somebody to come in with a different set of standards.
Those standards are negotiated. Let's be clear, it doesn't eliminate your zoning code. It doesn't eliminate your requirements. It allows you to have that conversation, but there's no requirement to do that either.
No, but I don't want to have that conversation.
Got it.
The thing is, the town doesn't have a choice. If somebody wants to come in under state law, they can ask for a specific plan, and the town reviews it. That is state law. So the town could deny the project, but the specific plan is a tool in the general plan code that people have the opportunity to use. And in some cases, like the villages where they did a PD, the specific plan may have been a little bit more. Andreas, the thing is, I think
I think at this point we're getting hung up on having specific plan in here when the town doesn't have one. I think if somebody brings forth the specific plan, they're going to need the general plan amendment anyway, and at that point we would create a designation for their specific plan. So I think we can just cut this for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm all in for that.
I don't think that wasn't in there before, was it? So you don't actually have to cross it out. You just delete it, right? Wasn't this added text?
Yeah.
I think the town feels like we were burned on the village with all the changes because they were doing a PD. All the things that they did that were totally outside our zoning ordinances. And the planning commission finally asked the planning person, could you give us an idea of the things that are different. And he finally gave us a chart of something like 182 things that were different than our zoning code. So I think we're a little sketchy on wanting to welcome that kind of change.
I have one
That doesn't mean they
question.
can't do it, but
I have one question about a specific plan. Is it binding or is it vulnerable to voter referendum?
Andreas.
Is what vulnerable to a referendum?
A specific plan. If the town approves a specific plan and a voter group objects to it, can they have a referendum vote and throw it out?
I suppose so. I'd have to go back and look at state law on referendums. I suppose.
Yeah. Just curious.
I think so,
though. Okay.
I know with the village, I asked one of the proponents, why didn't you change the general plan so everything would be matched up again? And they said, the lawyer said that we could do the referendum on the things that they did, but you can't change a general plan by referendum.
Just to be clear, that was not this lawyer or Jeff Mitchell that
Right,
told them that.
right.
That was some private
I
attorney.
don't know if that lawyer was
hired for
correct
that.
either, but that's what I was told.
And I'm not going to opine on whether that lawyer was correct or not.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, everybody's hype centered on the one project that went sideways. I normally see specific plans in downtowns as redevelopment areas. That's where I see them most, and that's where they do the most benefit. But again, as was brought up, when we want a specific plan, we can add it. So we don't need to belabor it.
Okay. Move on.
Excuse me, Mark, when this document refers to table X-X, I have a member of the public wanting an explanation on what that table is.
If you let me,
what's in that table.
If you let me pull down on the scroll wheel twice, we'll all see together.
Thank you.
There it is. I don't number the tables because I don't know what they're going to be numbered. So that's why they go to X-X until we do the final numbering. And this is the summary table that we've spent a little bit of time with. Let me explain what you're looking at here. This is the land use category on the left. These match or will once I get done with all of the labeling here. They'll match all of what the committee's done up above. In this table, if it's not underlined or strike through, it hasn't been changed. And then over here, because we were asked where some of these numbers came from, because they're different than what's in the general plan. Some of them came out of the zoning code. A couple other things that are a little odd. We don't do ranges in our general plan. We do maximums. So if you don't like the maximum, it needs to get less, or we need to change that because we don't do ranges here. Ranges are okay in the zoning code, depending on what you're looking at, but not here. And then we do have a couple of recommendations you'll see underlined here, but it's something to take a look at and figure it out. So I would like to tell you that people will look at the entire general plan, but my experience is they'll have the map in this table.
And the text that we just discussed will be incorporated into this table. So it will be a table that includes the text that we just discussed and these requirements.
Right. So when we do the general plan or the next iteration, this column will disappear because it isn't relevant for the current general plan. And this column can get a little larger. And my plan is to put the text that we just talked about up above in the table. So it's all in one spot.
Thank
you, Mark.
So I'm assuming we're going through each land use category for its residential density, maximum coverage. Mark can discuss what changes have been made and go through each one real quickly, hopefully.
Good. So I'll start with RA. The zoning ordinance table allows up to 25%. So if the zoning is going to allow this, then our coverage needs to allow it. If we want it to stay at 20%, then we need to reduce it in the zoning code. So I just need to know which one you want to do.
Miguel, you may unmute.
Yeah, realistically, on the residential agricultural, which is like almost 5 acres, which means it's 200,000 square feet. And I know you talked about outbuildings and barns and all, but you would allow 100,000 square feet of building development on that? That just sounds preposterous.
That's about the size of my garage, Miguel. That's my dream garage.
Oh, come on, be serious.
You're right though, Miguel. That is an awfully large building. And
And
seriously,
lot coverage can also include paved surface. So we need to be mindful of the fact that we may need to look at the definition of lot coverage when we're talking about this.
Greenhouses. If you had a nursery,
Would it include, like, let's say you had a nursery with growing beds, would that include the growing beds?
If they were enclosed under a greenhouse, yes. If they're outdoors, probably not, because it's not considered coverage.
Okay, well, I could see if for a nursery, if they had greenhouses, then the 100,000 wouldn't be way too much. So I guess there are some examples where that would be allowable.
I mean, one of the questions in the town, has there been an issue in your RA designation with too much coverage, given that the zoning allows 25%?
well, the zoning actually, what we currently have is 20%, and it's the 25 is really to allow for these old 1 acre parcels that the county, we inherited from the county. Smaller parcels that basically are more like one of our lower density zones that does have not lower, a higher density zone. They're more like a higher density zone that does have more lot coverage. So I'm a little, I understand what you're saying, but it's not everybody. It's only these smaller non-conforming parcels basically that get a little bit more because they have a smaller piece of property to put it on. So I'm not really sure what to do with these things here. I think it gives the wrong impression if somebody just looks at this and says, oh, I can do 25%. And no, it hasn't been in the past, but given what is happening and who is buying our larger parcels and the kind of stuff that is more and more being put up, where Bonnie is, they've got a lot, they've got conservation areas and everything is restricted to the building envelope, but that's not the case in our bigger parcels here. So I don't know, how do we fix this that we get to do the same thing that we want to do now? In other words, we want 20%, except if you have one of those small parcels, we understand that you should have a little bit more. How do we fix this?
I suggest that you leave it as 20% max and then put a footnote that says excluding non-conforming parcels, see zoning code.
Okay, Andreas, Mr. Attorney.
So I don't like the idea of carving out non-conforming uses to have a different maximum lot coverage. The other thing that I just noticed is on our table, if we look at the rural residential, which is one unit to the acre, which is analogous to the non-conforming uses Gene was just talking about, we've got a 20% coverage requirement. So I'm not sure why those in the RA that have 1 acre parcels get to have 25%, but the ones that are in rural residential get 20.
Good point.
So maybe it's 20 across the board and we just eliminate this 25% business altogether.
And Carol and Mary Beth, are we aware of anyone who's got the 25% because it was unusual?
Hold on, she's coming.
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that I'm aware of, because we tend to look at both of them. And if you're looking at the RA, again, like Miguel said, somebody who is on a lot that large, I think one of the biggest buildings we have is, I mean, a single building is in fact a nursery. I mean, it's a greenhouse. So it's not been something where it's more problematic on our small lots. If you were to think about building a big house on a small lot, that's where we actually deal with density questions on those, because on the small lots, they want to build a big house and it just doesn't fit.
Right. Okay.
But, I can't think of in the amount of time that I've done it that we've had one come in. I mean, we have a very big one coming into Montserrat, and very big is, 19,000 under roof on a 5-acre parcel. So I have not seen anybody that has stretched it to that point.
So given everything I've heard, the town should be pretty comfortable just going 20% and getting rid of the text in the zoning code. You may want to leave that in there because as this moves forward, Mark, it's important to let people know where we are, but then make a further note that, given that the RL is, or RR 1 acre lot is 20%, we're going to leave it at 20% and update the zoning code at the appropriate time.
I like that. Jean? Leave it at 20, take out the 25.
Cool stuff. All right, so rural residential, all of these are identical to the.
What happens when, I know we haven't gotten to the housing thing that we're gonna have on November 3rd, but so are all these lots, these are all splittable, and then it's another, each one of those gets 20%? Is that how that works?
Under the new law.
Yeah, and we'll have to get some guidance. Everybody's still figuring out the new law, Gene. It's not as simple as everything can be split.
Okay,
More to come on that.
right.
But yeah, once you split a parcel, then all of the new stuff still applies. Okay, so is there any changes here?
Why don't you go down each one and get a yay or nay, or if there's no discussion, we move on to the next one.
Rural residential? Residential low density? Residential medium density? Medium high density?
So can we discuss that one? Because that's a clear change from the last general plan.
No, that's the same.
The residential high density says 10 to 25 dwelling units per acre now.
Not there.
No, we're not there. We're medium high.
Oh,
One more.
Residential high density, this change comes out of your housing element.
Correct.
It is also consistent with the high density overlay that the town has.
Does that answer your question, Beth?
so the housing element is part of the general plan, correct?
Yes.
So who is controlling who? I mean, if the land use committee wants it to be 10 to 15 or whatever dwelling units, do we go back to the housing element committee to change that chapter?
No, the housing element's already been updated. That was the one element that we already had to update because of the state regulations with housing and community development requires. So that's why that number was already changed. That number was based on feedback we got from the state. So that is basically controlling over this element here.
The
So the
state basically
state
tells us what to do on that.
state mandates that we need to have 20 to allow up to 20 dwelling units per acre. And then we've also assigned an overlay to one specific parcel, I think. That
Up to
allows us
20, up to 25 dwelling units per acre. This HCD has put in 25 DU per acre. That overlay was done the last housing element for the 20 to 25, but the newest housing element adopted is 25.
And the reason it goes to 25 is the state only allows you to count 80% for your meeting. They don't allow you to count the maximum density.
Matt Fox?
Yeah, real quick on the, so that 50%, I wonder if we need to have discussion on that number. Basically kind of drives whether we're talking about 2-story apartments or 3-story apartments, right? If we, at 50%, we're probably talking about forcing 3-story apartments, whereas if we increase that, maybe we have 2-story apartments. So I don't know, with more apartments but less green space between the apartments. I don't know if that's something that the committee wants to consider.
Yeah, I don't think we have a lot of wiggle room on this because the housing element has already gone through and made the recommendations, and it's bounced back and forth to the state a couple times, and it's been approved by the planning commission and council at this point. So it's kind of a done deal. And a lot of that was so that we can meet the requirement, our arena numbers. And that's what drove what you're seeing.
Greg, I think Matt is talking about the 50% land coverage. And the point he's making is a 50% land coverage of 25 units per acre. Do you have to go to a 3-story building? Or if you were to increase the land coverage, could you get it down that you could get that 25 dwelling units per acre in its 2-story building? I think that's the question he's asking.
Yeah,
I think HCD more cares about the density. They don't really care so much about the lot coverage that we impose. So I think we can still revisit the lot coverage percentage.
Are parking lots considered because they're paved or not?
They are.
They
Well,
are?
when we get to the glossary, we will have that discussion, but it generally coverage deals with anything that is causing water to go off the site. So building, roof line, paving of driveways, etc., is considered coverage.
Okay. So 50% may not be practical at 25 units an acre.
You could probably do it, but like Matt said, you're at 3-story buildings, I think.
And I don't know if the 40% might need to be looked at for the medium high density as well, if we're including the driveway and stuff, because I guess that number is basically going to drive the cost of the house, right? Do we want those medium high density homes to be kind of more affordable, or do we want them to be, do we want them to be $500,000 or $700,000? That's what that 40% is going to drive.
Okay, let me go away and come back with some other examples perhaps for this. I don't want to get high centered on the coverages. The coverages in the town are universally low. But I figured that was the intent of the town in order to keep more space between buildings. As we get to the higher densities and higher intensities, maybe it makes sense to fiddle with that. So I can give up with a couple of examples of this type of land use designation and what the coverages might end up being.
That would be very helpful, Mark.
Okay.
At 20, but we just said that 25 isn't an actual number because they only allow you to do 80% or something. So you're talking about 20 dwelling units per acre, correct?
That's different than the coverage.
Yeah, I'm not talking about that density is set by the general plan housing element, and I'm not tinkering with that. I'm talking about coverage.
They're not saying you can't build 25. They're just saying when they're going to count for our arena numbers, they're not going to count the whole thing. They're only going to count 80%. We can get somebody to build more. That's okay.
Right, and then they'll count them at that point.
Okay, because an acre, I mean, if you just do the math, for 43,560 square feet divided by 25 dwelling units, right? 43,560 divided by 25 is 1,700 square feet per unit. And then you just said times half, 0.5. That gives you 870 square feet per dwelling unit, including your driveway or whatever you just said. And that seems reasonable.
That doesn't account for landscaping, odd shaped parcels, drainage requirements, additional parking that the town may require.
Right, but we just said 2-story building, right? So then you're multiplying it by 2 again. So you're talking about 1,700 square feet, 1,750 square feet per dwelling unit. Sounds reasonable to me. So I would recommend staying at 50%. I would not increase it.
Mark, are you going to give us some pictures or something that we can get a better idea of what we're talking about here? or an idea of what does it take height-wise or something like that to do these things?
Yep. I'll talk to my design crew. We've got this stuff all over the place. A lot of this would have been discussed during the housing element as well. So, okay. For both of those, right?
Correct.
Okay, office professional, leaving those two in abeyance for now. Office professional, it has that range, which I would prefer that we not have a range. And I think Andreas would prefer we not have a range. So I just went with
Yes, a range is very difficult to impossible to enforce. A range is essentially the top of the range.
You know, another question on the range in the number of units per acre. Why do we have a range there? Are we saying that you can't have less than 2 dwelling units per acre in the office, or less than 10 units of acre in the residential high density, or less than 2 dwelling units in a residential medium? Is that what we're saying? Because that's what this chart says.
That's how I read it.
And I'm just wondering why the range was in there. That generally in a general plan you have the maximum allowed, and you can go from 0 up to that number. And so I was just thinking, Gene and Miguel, is there a reason that there was a range on these?
Probably to give people some idea of what we're talking about, so that they don't think that it's automatically 6 units to the acre or automatically 10. In other words, it gives people, if they know it's 2, you know, you're looking at a half-acre lot. And at some point, one of these comes in around 3,500 square foot. So you know what's kind of what lot size you're beginning to talk about.
But when a planner or a developer looks at these, they're considered minimum densities.
Correct.
That means they have to come in at 6. That's where they start. And they can go to 10. Most developers will probably just go right to the 10, Gene.
Yeah. And we do say, do we say maximum up there at the top of the chart, or just, yeah, it does say maximum. Yep. So the range, you know, and maybe let's circle back, everybody think about it until the next meeting. But, you know, I look at it as a planner. If somebody came in and wanted to build a single family home on the RM, I'd say, no, you can't, you have to build 2. Because that's what it says.
Can you build 1 house and 1 ADU and it counts?
No, ADU is accessory to the house.
Well, you could come in with a proposal for 1 house on a half-acre.
That's
it's
true.
2 units
That's
to the
true.
acre. So you could, if you have a half-acre lot, you could propose a house for 1 acre, and you'd
That
be
is
fine
correct.
with that density.
Right.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Okay. Down to professional office. We have 2 to 10. 60% is the top end of the range. That's the only recommended change here.
And it used to be 30, right?
It used to be 35 to 60.
And actually in your general plan, the 60 was in the table and 35% was in the text. So we didn't know which it was or what the difference was. And the general plan text doesn't explain the difference.
And the functional result of that is that somebody could come in with a proposal for 60% coverage, and we would have to go with that.
Correct.
Is Miguel still there? Miguel, can you shed some light on this, because I feel like It's ambiguous. And it.
The
was
way
it
I
meant-
remember it is basically what the planners gave us. The planning consultant said, here's the range. I don't think anybody ever said you could have, how about just having one unit? This was what was presented to us. We were never given the idea of one unit on some of these. This was a range that we were given. But getting back to the coverage, that includes so in professional, that would include the parking lot, any asphalt surface. Okay.
Are we okay with the way it is, or anybody recommending changes, or?
You know, I feel like, I think we really need to get a little bit more information, and I'd be really interested to see what you come up with, Mark, after you kind of look and see what other jurisdictions are doing. And I feel like just because there's such big ranges, and I don't know, we want to make sure that we're able to make a decision, and I'm not sure we have all the facts.
So I don't think it was a range originally on this table. It was an inconsistency between the text and the table. So we had both.
I have
It wasn't
the
that it was.
Yeah, I have the general plan, the old general plan in front of me, and the maximum site coverage was 35 to 60%.
It was a range, okay.
Yeah,
I have a question.
go for it.
Hello?
Yes.
Well, the office professional buildings, which I visited on King Road, if you count the parking lot and the building, their coverage is like 80 or 90%. It's not, when you say 60%, including the asphalt area, what the rest, is the rest supposed to be like landscaping, lawns and things of that nature?
Correct.
Because
Conserved open space.
yeah, but you look there on King Road, I know where my physical therapist is. There's a little landscaping in front, probably 15 feet, but then it's building and parking lot in the back. So there might be, 80% of it is covered.
Can we open the glossary? Because I don't think asphalt is included in coverage. I think it's just structures.
Currently, it's just structures. I did add some text based on our conversations this evening and with a note saying, let's discuss this. But currently you are correct. The existing definition of site coverage is limited to structures only. So buildings and architectural features like decks or things like that.
Well, that makes more sense with a 60%. If you're including the parking, 60% doesn't make a lot of sense, I don't think.
Getting back to what Andrews was saying about site coverage earlier, it is more common practice to include paved surfaces that divert water. So that's a definition that I think we need to revisit. Because what we have here, where it just counts structures, is anomalous.
Yeah, if you're looking at the buildings plus the pavement, 60% that makes no sense. It should be more like 80 or 90 or,
right.
60% doesn't make sense at all.
Then I think we need to modify the definition before we modify this table. We can't have a conversation, or we need to talk about them both at the same time.
Yeah.
So I can read to you what I added to it. So it says the percentage of total site area occupied by structures, and then this is the part I added, and impervious surfaces such as driveways and patios. And then it goes on to talk about what counts as a structure or building coverage.
If somebody wanted to do a business, by the time we do the required parking, 60%, we would have no businesses.
Right.
Right now, we don't count flat surfaces at all because they're required. They're required to do parking. They're required to do all these things, and we have gone with the old definition that flat surfaces do not count in the percentages.
Madam Chairman, we're after 8 o'clock.
Yes.
And it sounds like there's a couple of things we should probably ponder. And I think the definition of coverage is one of those. And
Yeah.
then we can also take a look at how this applies to the various residential, non-residential parcels.
Okay.
And bring that back for our next meeting of the Land Use Committee.
Sounds like a good idea. Yeah, because it is getting late, and kind of what I was trying to reiterate last time was, it seems like we're going to be doing lots of math and we need a lot of facts, and it's getting late. So, all right. So does anybody have any other comments before we talk about our next meeting? Anybody from the public or on the committee? And we'll come back to this exact spot. And then Mary Beth, can you tell us about when our next meeting is going to be?
Certainly. What we would like the committee to consider is your availability during the week of October 18th. So today is October 4th, so not next week, but the following week, either Monday the 18th, Tuesday the 19th, Wednesday the 20th, or we could do Thursday the 21st at 6 o'clock. So any of those days, any times are acceptable.
Are all of these 6 o'clock?
To be determined by the committee.
Typically, you started at 3 o'clock for this committee. And 6 o'clock, this was the time everybody could gather for this one.
Can we go over the week of the 18th just to make sure that, because some of us are on multiple committees.
Yeah. So October 18th is a Monday. Tuesday the 19th is Tuesday. Wednesday the 20th. And then Thursday the 21st. But we have a subcommittee meeting at 3 o'clock on Thursday the 21st. The other days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we could start at 3. We could start at 4, 5, whatever. We could go 3-hour meetings, but I think this committee's decided 2 is sufficient.
So then it would be Monday, the 18th, or Tuesday, the 19th, or the 20th for a potential meeting. Does everybody want to meet again in a couple weeks, or is that too soon, or?
18th and 19th is good for me.
Cannot do the 18th. So that's the only day that week that I'm committed.
Does the 19th work for everybody? Is it too soon, or is everybody okay with meeting again so quickly?
2 weeks.
We got a lot to do.
We have a lot to do, and it won't be any new agenda material, so you have material. So what we'd like to do is kind of get through this, because there will be some committee recommendations coming to you, and we'd like you to focus on those when they come.
So it looks like nobody's objected to the 19th. If it's the 19th, shall we make it at 3 or at 6? My preference is 3. 6 is difficult. But what about everybody else?
That's okay by me.
Anybody cannot make 3 o'clock on the 19th?
This is Bonnie. I'll be driving kids around, but I can just do it on Zoom in my car.
Okay.
Would 4 to 6 work better for you, Bonnie? Should we leave it at 3?
Bonnie, would 4 o'clock work better?
Oh, sorry. 4 would be better, but again, I mean, let's see what works better for everybody else too.
4 is okay for me.
4 is
3
fine.
o'clock is my preference.
All right, well, why don't we just leave it at 3 then, if you don't mind, Bonnie?
That's fine.
Okay.
Okay, so we stuck the landing on Tuesday, October 19th, beginning at 3 o'clock, 2 hours, end at 5. I will send out a notice to everybody too, just so you can mark your calendars correctly.
Okay.
Which committee is going to be on the 21st?
Southeast I-80 Horseshoe Bar.
Oh, okay.
I think we
I thought
finished.
we finished that one.
Yeah, we finished that, Mary Beth. That's done. Yeah, we just have, there's 4 committees left: Parks and Recreation, Land Use, CR College, and the Business. So there's no meeting on the 21st.
Oh, correct. We ended that on September 30th, and my
Correct.
calendar has not been updated. Thank you.
You don't have to leak those immediately? Gee.
I'm old school. I got paper in front of me.
All right, so we are square for October 19 at 3 o'clock. All right, everybody, thank you again for your hard work tonight, and we'll see you soon.
Bonnie, is the 21st any better for you? Or kids the same thing?
It's the same thing. So 3 the 19th is fine. I'll just be on, I'll just not have my video on and just be driving around.
All right. Any other questions? 3 o'clock on the 19th. We'll see you then.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everybody.